Now, when you're going through those scales, the only way I can really give you a visual representation of how to analyze that, just imagine it's going to sound wacky, but this is actually how I approached it. Imagine you're crossing a stream, and those scale dots are rocks sticking out of the water. And all those highlighted notes, the numbers, are the chord notes in that particular mode. Now, those particular rocks, I guess a visual analogy would be those rocks are dry. All the other rocks are kind of mossy and wet. So if you land on the rocks that aren't chord notes, you might fall in, which means it's not going to have the melodicness of the note is not going to be as profound as if you were accenting the chord notes. Now, all the notes in between those chord notes are passing tones. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed in blues scales, you see, guys ripping on blues and they're adding a lot of notes here and there. And that's what that concept is. They're playing the notes that count. All the notes they're embellishing, throwing in between, they're zipping right past them. To give you kind of an example, like say, for instance, I'm playing like just a regular pentatonic scale. There's a blues note there, which is added, right? I don't know if you've ever seen a guy like, do a lick kind of. Now I've added a million notes there, like this note's not in the scale, this note's not in the scale, this note's not in the scale, this note's not in the scale. But if I zing right past, as long as my melodic sense of resolve is around those chord notes, then that's what's going to make lead guitar kind of happen. And that goes the same approach for chords too. What makes a lot of it confusing is you can build a lot of chords just based on these scale patterns. As long as your fingers line up with the dots, they work. And you don't necessarily have to know the chord names to do it. So in other words, like say if I was in a Dorian mode, not Dorian, Mixolydian, which is just major scale starting from D. Third, fifth, D major. If I played a D Mixolydian in that particular key, if I'm visualizing all these scale patterns, it's a kind of a connect the dots approach. So I'll give you an example. I'll drone like an open D. Now, when I'm playing that, I'm not thinking D minor 7, D raise 13, flat 5. D, I'm just remembering where the notes are in that particular key. And if I move my fingers and it sounds relatively good, works for me. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't really necessarily have to know the chord names. Not saying that I'm discouraging people from doing that, because I'm still learning. Where it's just like, oh, is that a D7 chord? I've been doing that. I just didn't know what it sounded like. Because most importantly, you're going to want to follow your ear. And these 7 chords, like I don't know if you noticed, I outline the chord name for each one of these chords. Those are the chords that go with that particular mode. So if you play any one of these chords, if you're in this particular key, if you decide I'm going to play B minor in the key of G major, as long as it's in that particular key, you'll be playing in B Phrygian, which has kind of a darker sound, the metal scale, I guess you can say. As long as you stick within the parameters of these 7 patterns that you have memorized, your ear is going to follow, because you're going to know, all right, in the B position, I'm going to be accenting the B, the D, and the F sharp, same thing. So I'll go right down the line, let you hear what each one of these modes sound like, and if you have any kind of questions, I can perhaps shed some light. I'm going to go, let's see, I did Dorian already. Let's try the Phrygian. This is one of my favorites because it reminds me of Egypt and sorcery, and I don't know. It's a good thing to kind of like imagine. If it reminds you of something, it'll give you an easier time to kind of grasp onto it. Because a lot of the times you're like, okay, I'm playing the B Phrygian pattern, but nothing's happening. If you can kind of get your ear to recognize a certain melody, then you'll gravitate towards the right notes and your ear becomes stronger. And for some reason, this mode reminds me of wizards and witches and whatever. But you'll hear what I mean. So that's the Phrygian mode. That one's a lot of fun because you can go ballistic with it, you know, and pretty much just keep going. I can do that for hours, but, you know, in my home alone because it gets kind of boring. The Lydian mode, which is the 4th scale degree, which goes over C major scale, or C major chord. What makes a lot of these chord names that go with these modes kind of confusing when you get into the in-between chords. Like a lot of these chords, you know, in C major you have a lot of embellished chords like this, regular C major. Yeah, this kind of thing, like a flat 5. So Lydian for some reason reminds me of flying. It's kind of like psychedelic. Yeah, exactly. Kind of like flying. You'll hear this mode used a lot. Players like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani. That's a big part of their sound because there's a lot of tension in it. There's a flat 5, which is, you know, if you play that note by itself, it sounds kind of sour. But if you bend that note up to the 5th, you kind of, that's what resolve is. When you add a bad note in a scale and you bend it to a right one, it kind of gives the note like an ending, you know. It's just like, that's your ear's interpretation of knowing, like, okay, this is going somewhere. You can't end on that note. Some people do and don't know it, but that would be a bad note to end on. That. But this is what the C Lydian mode sounds like. I'll just kind of draw on a C note, and immediately you'll start hearing like Steve Vai kind of. Sounds a little Steve Vai-ish, right? Steve Vai, Zappa, Satriani, they've used that mode a lot. Now Mixolydian, this particular mode, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. See, I'm a fraud. This is a 2. The 5th scale degree, which is a D, which is the G major scale starting from D. This sort of reminds me of like a national anthem for some reason. You'll hear what I mean. That's what I hear. You might hear something totally different. So that's what Mixolydian sounds like. Now shoot to the sixth note, or the sixth scale degree of the major scale, and you have the Aeolian, which is the relative minor. You guys ever heard of that term? If you play from the sixth scale degree of the major scale, you have your natural minor scale. Now this is the minor scale that's hidden within the key of G major, is the E minor scale. And everyone knows that. That's kind of the saddest of all keys. No, that's D minor. I'll just play it, but it's got kind of like, it portrays sadness really well. That's Aeolian, which is natural minor. Now Locrian is something jazz guys can do. There's not much I can do musically with it because every note in it sounds kind of bad. So you really gotta be on it. You gotta be like Frank Gambale or someone from another planet who hears things that no human should hear. But for one reason, the chord that goes with it is the F sharp diminished, which is this. Now, if you're creative enough to make music out of that, then more power to you. But all I really hear is what a lot of people end up doing is like playing diminished patterns over it, which kind of sounds outside of the box. Kind of hard. I don't recommend trying to solo over that one. But basically, if you memorize these 7 patterns, I know it sounds kind of corny. That's all you really need to know, because in relation to each other, these 7 particular scale patterns will be in the same place, even if you're in a different key. If you're in A major, everything just shifts over to here. But all the modes are the same distance from each other, and all the fingers are the same. They're just on a different part of the neck. And when you start getting into exotic scales and different things, you don't necessarily have to approach it to where you're learning a new scale, because a lot of the times like an exotic scale from another culture is just all a matter of just changing one note in the scale, like harmonic minor, for instance, where who's familiar with Yngwie? Yngwie Malmsteen, harmonic minor. He plays it to death. All it is a minor scale with the 7th note raised a half step. So instead of this, it's this, which is his trademark sound. He's played it so much that if you played it, everyone thinks you're ripping off Yngwie, because he's played it to death. It's his sound. That's his thing. Now, I'm not consciously playing Yngwie licks. It's just what comes out. You know, that's kind of how it sounds. It's a Bach thing, but he's always done that. Any questions so far? Go ahead. The more notes, the better then. Not necessarily. No, there's only 7 notes. All those notes I played, I've only played 7. Yeah.